Biases are what the others have. I can make rational judgments. I'm really not easily manipulable by the media, its framings and propaganda, unlike others. Unlike them, I observe the world fairly objectively. I mean, I'm well educated and well informed, I really read a lot, and see right through any manipulation attempt. I see reality, whereas others are often quite uninformed, irrational, and biased, I have to say. These obviously couldn't be further from the truth, but we've all internalized loads of baggage full of superiority ideology, which includes a whole set of cognitive biases that makes us, among other and probably much worse things, fall for false anti-third-party voting narratives.
Welcome to Deconstructing Necroliberalism.
Let's start with the most important and pervasive cognitive bias on which all propaganda and even our belief system rest: repetition bias. What we hear very often we fail to believe to be true. That is because when our neural networks in our brains are constantly trained to process the same information, the same patterns, the same underlying frameworks, again and again, the very same neural networks are trained and strengthened again and again. As a result, we come to understand that information more fluently and hence uncritically. We just let it pass and take it falsely as truth. This way we've learned our first language, and this way our whole worldview or belief system is built up through constant repetitions of the ever same fundamental macro frameworks. And if you're lucky enough to have stayed within the dominant society and with the mainstream media your whole life, you've repeated, out of the word's infinite number of possibilities, only an extremely narrow set of core ideas your whole life, and hence developed an extremely limited neural network, an extremely limited set of macro frameworks, an extremely narrow perspective or lens through which you process and view the whole world. So you'll be even more biased then. And this is exactly why systemically privileged people are often extremely ignorant. Since we are all members of groups, we are all constantly subjected to in-group information. Meanwhile, we barely get outside and fundamentally contradicting information. For example, perspectives from other cultures or the indigenous peoples of the world, or marginalized communities and their realities at home. Only speaking English already imprisons us in a bubble. Having not much time to read or listen to anything else than mainstream educational literature and media further narrows down our perspective, and so on and so on. And due to our desire for social acceptance, we are additionally incentivized to force to believe to be true what is very often repeated within this bubble. We believe the mainstream media in our country, but not those of Russia, Qatar, China, Turkey, or Cuba. But what has Cuba ever done wrong? Even worse, our whole underlying macro framework to interpret, see, and judge the world, history, and politics has been built up by our states or our culture's educational and knowledge system. We believe what in our culture is constantly said about politics. We even believe those politicians and parties more who and which we constantly hear talking. Not a good starting point for socialists and third parties, obviously. We live in a systemically authoritarian society, a systemically ableist, racist, sexist, trans-hating, and so on society. And all of our thinking is authoritarian. In authoritarian thinking, however, empathy is replaced by sympathy, othered love by self-love, to use a term coined by Hélène Cixous. And this also applies to groups. We favor people who we unconsciously perceive of as being like us, because they virtually repeat what we say and think, our underlying and unconscious frames, which we can handle more fluently and easily. That's easy listening. So in turn, we love it and listen more to them than others, more to our in-group, our mainstream, than to others, which would be much more challenging, and we believe them more than other people. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, so to say, creating an echo chamber. Yet, as indicated in the introduction, we nevertheless tend to believe that we see reality, that it is reality which is presented to us by our favorite mainstream media of our in-group. Even worse, because that is so convenient and self-affirming, we search for and find more information, and even remember information better, which confirms our worldview, and we disregard and minimize contradicting information. Moreover, we judge an argument's strength not by how strongly it supports the conclusion, but by how well the conclusion fits into our existing worldview. Let me explain. We've been reason to believe our country and our society are basically good, and third parties are basically useless. So we reframe every information we see on this issue into this dismissive framework, no matter how good the arguments for third parties actually are. Liberals right now are so desperately wanting something that supports their conclusion that third-party voting is futile or harmful, and that their party is saving us from fascism, that they are way too biased to recognize how weak and irrational most of their arguments are and how strong ours are. Speaking of fitting arguments into frameworks already existing in our brains, rather than actually processing and judging them rationally, let me briefly turn to the Barnum effect, which is an extremely important bias in liberal politics. Just like fortune tellers, yes, liberal politicians love to make very vague statements and promises so that they cannot be held accountable after the election if they don't fulfill what you have filled this vagueness with. Your delusional fantasies and fictions about them. You reframe the vague statements in your head in accordance with the frameworks already present there, frames about the supposed goodness of Democrats and our society and so on. You fit what was only vaguely expressed into your fictions about the world and the Democrats without recognizing this irrationality. Meanwhile, other listeners reframe the same vague statements in their heads in line with their minds' frameworks. As a result, you all will have created a completely different picture in your head of what was actually said. This way, so-called centrists can cater the broadest voter base possible, even to directly contradicting expectations, like the Chinese and supposed left-wingers. Guess whose expectations will be met? Not those of the systemically marginalized groups who don't have any power over politics to let their needs be put over the conveniences and greeds of the powerful privileged, except through withholding their votes, which is why you should do that. And through massive strikes and revolutions, of course. Back to our desire for confirmation of our worldviews and the following disregard for contradicting information. People might be, and I explain why in a minute, so intensively clinging to their core beliefs that even disapproving evidence may have the effect of confirming their beliefs. It's totally irrational. If you successfully deconstruct their argument, they may just twist that into, "Oh, I was right, you are a Russian bot, serving Russia's interests." A killer phrase to let them stay in their delusional worldview. Yet it's mostly people who've stayed in their mainstream in-group bubble for their whole lives and never needed to listen to marginalized people and contradicting perspectives and to learn about other realities. Realities created by the view that they hold so dear, who are nevertheless extremely convinced of their views, their supposedly rational argumentations, and supposedly objective or superior perspective and worldview, and supposedly strategical voting decisions. They are paternalistically confident they know best what is best for all. They even claim to vote for a genocider because of the firm belief another option would definitely be worse for the genocided and other marginalized people, just because they love to believe that their party is the best. which it is for themselves for upholding the status quo they profit off. Meanwhile, those who actually know more perspectives and realities outside of the mainstream's view and learn to see the systemicity of all our problems and hence a deep connectedness to Democrats are usually those who become ever more skeptical about what the mainstream media refers to as the best system of all times, best system thinkable or possible, and the claim that there are only two choices on the ballot, and likewise about what is supposedly common knowledge, but which is in reality nothing but convenient, repeated beliefs. To sum up this first part, we stick to our belief in what is said and fearmongered about third parties and third-party voting by mainstream media and privileged people with platforms who are particularly inclined to favor and reconfirm their own in-group belief system and worldview. In the next part, I'll explain why we, who don't profit off of the system so much, also tend to be literally too invested in it to leave it.